opening up our agent meeting to our support group leaders tonight because we think that street epistemology is such a great tool to have for all of us that are working with people that are in the middle of their journey coming out of a religion. And so I invited Eric Wells to be part of this tonight. So welcome, Eric.
Hey, thank you. Thank you very much, Todd. Yeah, I see several of our support group leaders here. I see Charlie, I see Sherry, and I see T on her iPad. If I miss your name, type it into the chat and say hello, but we've got several support group leaders here.
So Eric, I know you're familiar with street epistemology. Could you share just a little bit of your introduction of how you came across street epistemology and how it's helped you in your conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I came from Springfield, Missouri, and we had a fantastic secular community out there called the Springfield Skeptics, and we would host a Ask an Atheist event every Monday, or once a month. And so it was kind of a good practice, and for me, and I got to kind of see how I started out. Then when I got exposed to street epistemology, how my conversations changed from there. But I got to meet Anthony at an ACA event when he was on one of the times he was on the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen, and I got to really kind of be exposed to it for the first time, like the concept of it. And I stumbled across some of his videos and some of the other street epistemology videos, and just like, wow, this is fantastic stuff. So I've been starting to use it myself, or I've been using it myself for a while, but the thing that I struggle with the most still is just getting frustrated and angry and really wanting to not resist the urge to throw in like a zinger or something like that to kind of, I don't know, make myself feel better or something like that. But yeah, it's been really, really helpful.
That is one of the hardest things to do, is not to get angry, show counter evidence and stuff when you're using street epistemology. But on the other hand, that's the one of the things I love the most about it, is that you don't have to do those things. So Anthony, I met Anthony back in 2016. I was a firefighter still, and I was having these debates at the fire station about beliefs and things. And I found that no matter what I showed them, that my fellow firefighters would just double down on what they believed. And so on my own, I kind of figured out asking questions, people were more open to it. But I wasn't asking questions that reached deep enough. And I would come back from the fire station. My wife, Bonnie, would help me come up with better questions to ask the firefighters. One day I came back from the station. She goes, "Todd, you got to listen to this guy. He's so good." And she introduced me to Anthony. She heard him on a podcast, and I was blown away and dug into street epistemology and tried to learn it for myself, and had so much better conversations with my fellow firefighters. Anthony, welcome. We are so glad that you're here. We're going to turn it over to you. At the end, like we said, we're going to have some question and answering for everyone to ask questions, so you can keep those in mind.
Thank you very much for the very warm welcome. I'm really grateful that you guys discovered street epistemology and then found it useful too. That's really encouraging. I'm really glad to hear that. And it's an honor really to be able to present this tool, this technique to your agents, whether you're answering a phone or you're running a support group, that type of thing. I think it's a great tool that dovetails very nicely with what RfR is doing. And there's some caveats there, because street epistemology was originally, I suppose, intended to cause doubt in theists to the point where they might actually discard their belief. Of course, that's not what we do at RfR. I do have some slides here. Let me go ahead and pull up my slides and let me know if you guys can see this. How's that? Everyone can see that okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Really good. Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay, well, just a little bit of background. Both Eric and Todd mentioned that I've been doing street epistemology. I've been doing it for over probably around 8 years or so now, where I would essentially not debate with people or not argue, but actually ask them questions to have them explain how they arrived at their position. And when you use questions, it can be extremely effective in revealing problems with the reasons that people are giving and the methods people are using to validate their reasons. And it can actually cause a person to take another look at their views. But one of the cool things about street epistemology is that we've learned that it can be useful when you're engaging with people on all types of things, whether it's the fear of hell, or I'm worried that I'm going to get kicked out of my house. The very things that you face as agents of RfR, this tool can be useful for you. So I'm really pleased to be here to talk to you folks. In fact, there's a good chance that I may have interviewed some of you. I don't know if you remember or not, but I've been volunteering for Recovering for Religion, I think over 5 years now, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if that's not right, Todd.
I think you came on in 2015.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I decided to volunteer for Recovering from Religion is because I was seeing the effect of the conversations I was having with people on the street when I used this method. And I thought, well, where do they go now? So I wanted to make sure that there was a good, vibrant, supportive community to catch people at the end of the conversations, and that was RfR. And I started off as a helpline agent. I think we called it a hotline back then. I'm trying to get into the habit of calling a helpline, but I was a helpline agent actually taking phone calls, verbal phone calls with people for about 1.5 years or so, 2 years. And then I decided to keep volunteering, but not take phone calls anymore. It was getting to be a little bit too much. And now I conduct the intake interviews for volunteers for RfR. It's really fun talking to everybody and asking you lots of questions that are factored in when we decide who will be brought in. So that's a little bit about me. Who here, just to show of hands, I'm going to just skim through, just raise your hand if you got your camera on. Who here is already familiar with street epistemology? I see a lot of hands going up. So, okay. Okay, I just did a quick search. It looked like maybe half of you were familiar with them. That's great. This did start in the atheist community by an author who was saying, hey, if you use questions to challenge theists, you're going to probably cause them to doubt and they might actually become atheists. So that appealed to me at a certain point in my life. I guess it's still somewhat appealing, but we've learned really quickly that it can be used for other things. And we're going to be actually exploring how you can use this tool in your life when you're volunteering for this great organization. And that's what it is. Street epistemology is a tool that can be wielded to do different things. You can probably use it with RfR to get to the real core of why somebody is reaching out to the helpline or showing up at a support group. And you can do it in a very friendly yet effective and efficient way. And that's what I really like so much about this tool set. That's how I think that's my next slide here. That's actually how I think it could help RfR. It could probably help you become a better agent or a better facilitator of a support group when you start to realize the power of asking people questions rather than arguing with them, or maybe even talking a little bit too much about yourself. That could actually be counterproductive. And we're going to cover some of those things. What I wanted to do eventually, there's 3 sections, there's 4 sections. There's the intro, which I've just covered. There's some basic suggestions that I want to cover and go over. And then we have the third part of this is we have some scenarios that you as agents will probably come across if you haven't already. And how do you respond using street epistemology? So we'll cover that. And then we'll end with I'll talk about some resources that you can find to help you with this more, and then we'll get into a Q&A. So you can save all your questions to the end, and we'll probably have a good 20 minutes or so at the end to talk about your questions, and I'll try to answer them. And for people that are uncomfortable unmuting your mic and talking, you can type in your question too. In fact, you can do that at any point, just so you don't forget it in the chat window, and then I'll circle back and pick it up later. All right, so here are a few basic suggestions that I see being really important, whether you're doing street epistemology on the street or organically when somebody makes a claim, or if you're actually working with RfR. And that is, I think, the resisting the urge to talk too much about yourself. Sometimes when you encounter somebody who is struggling and you also were struggling and you can really relate to them, it can be really tempting to just keep talking about yourself and how you overcame it. But people aren't usually reaching out to hear other people's stories. Sometimes people are, but for the most part, they're looking to get something off of their chest. And if you spend too much time talking about yourself, the person may feel like they're not being listened to. So hold off on doing that if you can. It's okay to build a little bit of rapport, like, oh yeah, the weather's great where I'm at. How's it over there? That type of thing. But I wouldn't get too detailed. Even if you think that your story might resonate with them, it's better to ask them questions to figure out what they would respond to most, rather than assuming they're going to find your deconversion story very compelling, or how you got past hell or something like that. Okay. Questions are extremely important. You probably noticed, I would suspect this was probably covered when you went through your training with recovering from religion, that it's not really telling people things, it's asking them questions to reveal which direction do I go with this conversation. And you'll notice in some of the Street Epistemology videos that you may have seen, we ask a lot of questions. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that you don't want to overwhelm anybody with too many questions. You may be thinking of questions and typing them out, and they're responding, and you're thinking of another question. It could be really easy to overwhelm your conversation partner with too many questions, which kind of goes to I think I even have one in here. Let's see here. Sorry, I think I just got to definitely use questions to reveal the issue that's at hand. And when you use these questions to hopefully reveal the issue, it's useful to repeat back what you think the issue is. And that's why I have what you think is in parentheses, because you may say, oh, I've got this guy completely figured out. I'm going to just summarize what I think he's telling me, and we're going to be golden. And you do that, and you find out that it's not at all what they were saying. Or maybe they say something like, well, now that you're repeating it back, it's very accurate to what I told you, but I completely forgot this really important detail. So it's very, very helpful to repeat back what you think you're hearing, and try to use their own words if you can, or at least your best summary of what they're saying to you. That helps a person feel heard, and it clears up any confusion generally about what it is they're telling you and what you're taking in. All right. This is something that I notice when I do street epistemology, and I'm sure you as agents will encounter this as well. As you're figuring out what the issue is that's prompting the person to reach out to recovering from religion, they may say things that could detract from actually getting to the point where you can help them. So they may say something about their dog, and for example, and you may spend a lot of time talking about their dog. I suppose maybe that's not the best example, but try not to get too wrapped up into what they all these other ancillary things that might be coming up, and really try to stay focused on the issue that's bringing them to you. You don't have to be a robot and just drive down to the foundation. You can swerve a little bit, but don't go off into the weeds. However, I understand that, you're talking with human beings. These are people who are reaching out. They're in a lot of hurt. Sometimes you might actually have to deviate a little bit. Sometimes people will naturally raise up things that are different from the topic that you're talking about because they need a little bit of a mental break, but they're still engaged. Keep that in mind, and then try to bring it back. Look for an opportunity to bring it back and say, yeah, well, I guess we've been talking about your dog for a little bit. Do you mind if we get back to the main reason why you called, or the main reason why you reached out, or the main reason why you showed up at this meeting? Did it have something to do with the fear of hell? Was that what it was? You can always try to redirect it back to it. All right. This is something that just kind of dawned on me when Todd asked me to talk to your group. And I was thinking that there's probably some real value in identifying the emotion that's at the heart of the issue that's prompting the person to reach out. And when we go through these couple different scenarios, I think there's like eight scenarios or so, what I'd like you to do is think of the emotion, the underlying emotion that may be prompting the person to be having these issues, or to be troubled, to be reaching out to recovering from religion. Is it fear? Is it loneliness? Is it uncertainty or doubt? Is it shame? These can be motivating emotions that are at the heart of it, and identifying that there probably is an emotion going on there, and gently bringing it to the person's attention. This sounds like this might be an issue. Like when I'm listening to you, or when I'm hearing you here, when I'm reading your words, it almost seems like you're saying, you're feeling a little bit lonely. Is that an accurate representation of what you're feeling at this moment? It could be really useful to do that. Summarize and repeat back. I think I covered that. And here's another thing that I've started doing recently too, is look for opportunities to commend a person when they are doing something that's useful to the dialogue that you're having, but not to the point where you're being snide about it or condescending. Like, don't overdo it, and only do this when you're noticing something that they're honestly doing. Like they genuinely seemed willing to participate, or they're really considering your questions. You could say, it seems like you're taking a lot of time in between responses here. And I think that's great. Are you giving some thought to these questions? And they may say, yeah, I'm really thinking about it. And you can say, I think it's really good that you're taking the time to process this. We're in no rush whatsoever. Did I have a slide for that? Yeah. Okay. Don't rush. Here's an important thing. And sometimes this even happens to me when I'm engaging with people about their claims on the street and I'm recording it for my YouTube channel. Or even if I'm having a conversation with somebody at the grocery store or whatever, although that's not happening as much these days. There might be a tendency to anticipate where they're going and just rushing through it and be like, okay, they have a fear of hell. Here's the 3 resources they need. Come on, let's get to it. Try to resist that urge to rush them through it. This may be their very first time reaching out to an organization. They don't know what to expect. So it might be your 300th person that you've assisted, or your 30th even. But it's probably their first time reaching out to you. And if a person gets the sense that you're rushed, they're going to probably think you're not paying attention to them. They're going to probably think that you don't care, and they're going to probably leave the helpline. And that's something that I would imagine we don't want to have happen. So that being said, one of the best things that I think that you can do to minimize the antsiness that you may be feeling is to really carve out a good hour before you decide to volunteer for the hotline. That would be my recommendation. That's something that I try to do. If I'm going to go out and record interviews, I want to make sure that I don't have a meeting at 2 o'clock and I'm rushing to get some interviews in before I have to rush home and do that. Because I've noticed when I do that, it shows up in my conversations. And when I play them back, I notice that I'm antsy, and I think it can come through in your conversations. And you definitely, I think, don't want to do that. Okay, I think this is the last suggestion I have for you folks as RfR agents, and that would be, and maybe you do this, but it could be useful to ask the person that you're speaking with, or whoever showed up at your support group meeting or whatever, if there's something that they think that they can do to not only remind them of the conversation that you just had with them, but to advance them from the point that they're at now. You may say something like, sometimes when I talk to people about the fear of hell, I get feedback later that they journaled about it and it ended up helping them later. Do you think that that might be something you'd be interested in doing, or something along those lines? And they may say, well, I'm not a real big journaler, but I love painting. Maybe I can paint something. Do you think that would help? I'm not sure. What do you think? Do you think that that would help? Yeah, I think maybe that would help. So coming up with a little homework assignment or some sort of action item, maybe that can perpetuate the conversation that you had and help it stick with them longer, I think could be really useful. Because they may never call back into the RfR, not because you did a bad job or anything like that, but maybe they felt like you helped them. But I'm thinking, if you could just give them one little thing to possibly help them, because if they think it's going to help them, it probably will help them. And that would be something that I'd recommend. All right, we're going to get into some common RfR scenarios here. These are things that I think Todd and Eric put together. These are things that you folks probably see or will see when you're engaging with people. And what I'd like to do, you know what I want to do before I get into that? I'm going to copy and paste. Let me end my screen share here for a second. In the chat, I'm going to copy and paste those things that I just talked about, so you have them there for your notes. Okay. How's everyone doing? It's weird talking to an empty room, I gotta say. It's not empty, but I'm not hearing anything except silence.
I'm doing great, man.
You're doing great. It's just a little awkward. It's weird.
Yeah. Well, we can have a conversation. I mean, while you're copying.
Eric and I are really good at interrupting people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I really like it when it's quiet, but it's almost too quiet. But
Yeah.
that's fine. We'll definitely have time during the Q&A where we can get all rambunctious.
All right.
So here's one of like 7 scenarios that you might find as an agent. Somebody might say, I don't know if I can still believe, but what if I'm wrong about it? One thing that I would probably try to do is, and I'm going to try to start doing this when I actually engage with somebody where I'm using SE, is to ask myself, what is the underlying emotion here? What are they feeling? Now, in this case, they might be feeling doubt, uncertainty, uneasiness. So I might respond with something like, as I'm reading what you're typing or as I'm listening to you, it seems like I'm getting a sense of uneasiness from you. Would that be a fair characterization of what you're feeling? And they may say, yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly it. That could be really useful. You can really connect with a person if you can acknowledge the emotion that they're having. But did you notice how I worded the question? It wasn't, I can sense that you're uneasy. They may not be feeling uneasy. So be really careful with your questions. Don't suggest things to them, but ask them. You can even ask them, if we were to give this, what you're telling me, or the situation you're in, if we were to identify the emotion behind it, what would you call it? You can even go so far as to do that. And now it might be really tempting to say, oh, dude, I was totally there. I was in your same shoes, and I really struggled with it, but I got through it. Now, as I understand it, that might be crossing a little bit of a line with what RfR. I think RfR is really cautious about you revealing too much about yourself, but I think there's ways around it if that's the case. And Todd, feel free to jump in here at all. But one thing that you can say is, I talk to a lot of people who call the helpline, or they message us, or they show up at these support groups, and I found that a lot of people do struggle with it at first, but then they eventually get past it. So that might be one way of letting them know that they're normal, but you're not injecting yourself in it. Try to think of yourself as a neutral observer who's sort of an egoless person who's there to help, and be a mirror to the person who's calling in or talking.
It can be it can be really difficult because sometimes we will be asked personal questions. Anthony, what did you do when you faced this? How did you react to it? And our policy is that we don't want to talk about ourselves. We want to keep our focus on our client. But when we ask these personal questions, I tell our agents to use the term, some people find that when they struggle with the fear of hell that they will do such and such and so, and then bring it back to that person again by saying, in your situation, you think that you can find this helpful. So that way, the focus is not on you, you turn it back on them. You're not using the first person terms, me, my, or I, but some people.
I think it's great. Yeah, if you can remove yourself, and in some instances, maybe even remove them from the scenario. Some things that I've tried before, like if I meet somebody and they're expressing doubt about their God, or they're like, but I don't know what I would do. Like the only way that I got through my divorce was because God was there. And I might say something like, well, do you know anyone that doesn't believe in a God that got divorced? Well, yeah, my best friend is like that. She got through it. How do you think she managed to get through it and not needing a God belief? Now, I might use that because I'm there to challenge their God view, but you can use it in these situations too. If you had a friend who wasn't sure how they could still, if they could still struggle with this dilemma that's on this little slide here, how do you think a person can get through it? That might be a really good way. They probably know somebody that did get through it. I don't think I've ever had somebody say it's impossible to get through it without God. Now, there are some exceptions, but for the most part, people will understand that, oh no, there are people that are moral without God. Like, how do they do that? Here's another one you'll probably hear. I don't believe anymore, but I'm still afraid of hell. What do you think? And you can actually type this. Go ahead and start typing these. What do you think is the underlying emotion? Just guessing here. Go ahead and type that in the chat, and I'll end my share screen so I can look at your words. I don't believe anymore, but I'm still afraid of hell. What's the underlying emotion there? Fear, 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 fear. Right. Yeah, perfect. That's exactly it. they're probably feeling a sense of fear. So a good question might be something like, I'm getting the impression that that there might be some underlying fear going on here. Would that be an accurate characterization of what you're saying? Yeah, that's exactly it. Or they may say, well, it's not so much fear as it is a wistful longing for the past or something like that. You don't know who you're speaking with and what their underlying reasons are for their trauma until you engage with them using questions. So just keep asking questions. Don't make any assumptions here. If I stop believing, where would my morals come from? What do you think would be the underlying emotion here? Let me think about this a second here. If I stop believing, where would my morals come from? This is probably like, I mean, I'm not even looking at your responses, but I'm going to just throw this out there. There's probably some uncertainty. They're probably thinking, maybe I'm not personally capable of doing this. So probably some, maybe even a confidence, like maybe even like an underlying level of confidence that I don't know if I'm capable of being a good person without this. So a good, that sort of scenario, let me read what you guys typed here real quick. Sorry, it's a little awkward because I have to stop the screen share to look at your comments. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, anxiety, lack of trust in themselves. That's a good one. Very, very good. Anxiety. Excellent. Those were better than the ones I came up with. You guys are all good, empathetic people. I imagine most of you, if you're volunteering for a group like this. So you guys are going to probably be fairly intuitive at assessing what emotion they're probably feeling. But don't open yourself up to the possibility that you could be way off. So what would be a good question to ask here? I'm thinking something like, let's say that you eventually did stop believing. Do you think that you would be different in any way? Would you start behaving differently? Do you think that you would be less of a good person if you no longer had the belief? That might be a good question to ask. What alternate moral system do you think that you can come up with if you decided that you can't believe the God one that you were raised with? That's probably the approach that I would go there. But resist the temptation to say, it's okay, we're good people. Try to ask them questions to actually figure out what they would find convincing and then go there. What's a good way of putting this? People are going to probably respond very favorably to the engagement that you're having with them if you're using their own words and their own situation and you're really relating to them. And that can't happen if you're not listening and you're not asking questions. And if you're rushing through it, you're going to miss some cues. And that will probably translate into a sort of so-so type of engagement. All right. What emotion is going on here? How do I live my life now that I no longer believe? I think I saw uncertainty, anxiety in the previous one. That probably applies here too. How do I live my life now that I no longer believe? Yeah, probably. I think the last one, like a lack of trust in yourself. Like maybe I'm incapable of doing this. Maybe I'm not as strong of a person as I think that I am. What would I say here? How do I live my life now? This is probably something RfR agents already do, but you could ask something like, what do you think you would need in your life to fill the gap that you think might be there because you no longer believe in God? Like, number one, do you think that there's a gap there if you stop believing? And number two, how do you think that you would fill it? Would you need more community? Would it just be a matter of just joining an online group? Is it just subscribing to a channel and just immersing yourself in somebody's content? How do you think you'd go about doing it? What would fill that gap for you? How would your life be any different? Might be another good question. I'm hearkening back to the last one. Okay, here's another scenario. Do you guys actually get these? I left church and now I don't know how to connect with other people. Very similar to the last one, I think. What emotion is going on here? I could think of one. I'm thinking of loneliness. Did anyone type that? Yeah. I left church and now I don't know how to connect with other people. I feel like I'm not a part of a tribe anymore. I'm not sure how to connect with others at this point. It could be useful to have them explore how they connected with people when they did believe. Well, I would go to church and I'd be around all these people. We'd sing together. That was really important to me when I sang. I really felt the most connected to a community when I was singing and holding hands with people. Is there some other way that you could achieve that without believing that God is real? You know, if you actually decide to leave the church, how would a person go about finding that same community? Well, maybe I guess I could just start going to concerts more, or maybe there's an online community, or maybe I'll go to a support group, something like that. All right. What emotion's going on here? I feel dirty with my sexuality. I'm going to jump over and see what you guys type. Shame. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I think I agree with that one. I think shame is probably there. So you can take a stab at it. You could say something like, okay. It sounds to me like there might be an element of shame going on. Would that be fair to say? You can try that. And they may say, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I'm really struggling with shame. What do I do? Again, I would say, well, was there ever a point where you didn't feel shame? Well, yeah, when I believed. Okay, well, what is it about not believing that still brings with you this sense of shame? And they may give some story about, you know, when they were a kid and something that happened that is just sticking with them. All right. Next one here. How do I relate to believers during times of loss? What emotion is going on here? This is a tough one. How do I relate to believers during times of loss? I would think that this might be like, let me see what you guys are typing. Empathy. Good one, Kimberly. Yeah. Fear of rejection. Good one. Probably all those things. Anything else? Isolation. Yeah. Yeah, this is probably coming from a place, a good place. Like, I love these people. I don't believe it anymore. They're hurting. How do I relate to them? And I suppose you can ask them, well, what were you thinking about doing? Well, I was thinking about sending them some flowers. Do you think that that would fail? Do you think that that wouldn't achieve your objective? What might be a better way? Is there some reason? Because sometimes people, I think, they maybe overestimate the impact of the God belief that it has on their relationships. That, oh wow, no, I can probably still show that I love them, that I'm sorry for them, even though they don't believe. Now, there might be in this situation somebody who says, well, I just don't want you being around. I've lost this person. I think they're going to heaven and you don't. And I just can't stand the thought of you thinking that my loved one isn't in heaven. So feel them out, figure out what the situation is, and use questions to get there. Okay, I think this is maybe the second to last one. I still live at home. Should I tell my parents I don't believe anymore? What emotion's happening here? Social anxiety, implications, fear. Yeah. There's probably a sense of uneasiness. Like, I can get kicked out of my house if I don't profess to believe this anymore. From what I understand, you do get a lot of young people reaching out. So this is a fairly common situation that you might find yourself in. Of course, you have to be careful. You don't want to give advice. You really don't want to really give advice ever. You want to have the person coming to their own realization of what is the best advice for them by you using questions. But of course, we don't want to harm anybody. Whether we're engaging with somebody using SE on the street or organically, or you're using an aspect of it when you're engaging with people here, you have to be very, very careful here, and especially here. I think it could be useful to probably ask them, what do they think the worst response would be if they came out to their parents? What would the best response would be? What would the best response be? Do they know anyone else who maybe told their parents that they don't believe? What was their reaction? Would it be more useful to bring somebody who no longer believes that they respect into the house and maybe have a conversation with them. But this is a really critical situation that you have to be very careful with. This happens on Atheist Experience. Not that I'm like on that show all the time, but I do watch it a lot. I don't know, once every month, they usually get a call from somebody who's in this situation. So it's pretty tricky. Go slow here. Okay, and then the last example here before I get into some resources and I'll start taking your questions. And I think we got about 23 minutes I'm looking at, is this one. Now, this situation is very interesting because it runs the risk of causing you to go beyond the scope of what RfR, I think, is trying to do. This is a person who's saying, I'm struggling with one last thing before completely abandoning my religion. You need to find out what they want from you or from RfR. Now, they may say, you can even say, your question really has me wondering which direction to go here. And I'm really struggling to figure out what question to ask you next. And I'm not entirely sure. So can you tell me a little bit more about what you're hoping to get from this? And they may say, I have this one last little remnant and it has to do with prophecy in the Bible or something. And if I could just overcome that, I'm going to be a happy atheist. Now, it might be really tempting as an agent to want to ask those questions, but I'll defer to Todd on this one. This might be a situation where you say, that's outside of the scope because we're not here to instill doubt. However, there are people who are willing to do that. And maybe you can refer them to one of the Street Epistemology communities where there are tons of people who are looking for opportunities to practice the method on folks like that. But you can just come out and ask them and they say, well, no, that I am struggling with that, but I'm not here for you to question that. I can deal with that on my own. I'm really more wondering about this one thing. Like I'm thinking about finding a group in my area. Can you recommend something there? So don't just assume, especially on this type of question. We don't want to get the reputation, that RfR is deconverting people. I'm pretty sure that that's outside of the scope of what you guys are trying to do. But you can, here's the thing you have to keep in mind. You can use these questions to do that. So you have to be aware of you need to be really cognizant of the impact your questions can have on people. Because you may ask a question and it may be that one last thing that just, kicks out everything and they won't hold that belief anymore. So be really careful with this one. Okay, now, so as far as resources, there is the Street Epistemology website, and I'll type in the link, or maybe Todd or Eric can type that in. It's streetepistemology.com, and you'll find links to communities and other resources where you can engage with people who are learning this. And you can even introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm an agent with Recovering from Religion, and we've been advised to start using Street Epistemology in some circumstances, and I'm looking for some guidance. Like, what is a good question to ask somebody who says this? I was really stumped the other day. And I noticed that I mistyped epistemology here. So sorry about that. You think of all the words that I would get right, it would be that one. I may have had a beer when I was typing these slides up last night. So yeah. All right. But go to the website. Oh, and check out videos. There are videos of people using a more focused version of Street Epistemology on YouTube. So if you search for my name, for example, Anthony Street Epistemology on YouTube, you'll probably find my channel and you'll see some examples. Watch the recent stuff because the older stuff is not good in my view, although it shows my progression. And you can get a sense. I think if you watch a number of videos, and a lot of you raised your hands already, you're somewhat familiar with it. You might actually start anticipating what questions I might ask, but then put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's reaching out. And you folks are in a really good spot, I think, in that you have the ability to observe your other agents' interactions. So you may see a dialogue and think, oh, I think it may have been better to ask this question rather than one that she just asked. Not that you want to like tear anybody down, but use it as a way to improve your own interactions. Okay, let's shift to the Q&A. And I think do I have anything else after this? No, that's it. So this is the Q&A portion. It looks like we have about 19 minutes. That's perfect. This is the time where you can, I'm gonna go ahead and stop my sharing. This is the time where you can either unmute your microphone and ask your question or type in your question in the chat. Hopefully you guys can activate the little chat window there, and I'd be happy to try to answer your question as best that I can.
And what we're going to do, we're going to unmute everyone's mic, and then we would like you to manually keep yourself muted unless you're asking a question. So that way we can keep the noise down.
We've got one question in the chat. One of the attendees isn't familiar with the Bible. How would you respond to folks using Bible quotes?
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what scenario you're mentioning, but
well, there's a Bible verse in Romans, like, yeah, when people would say, like, well, you know God. I mean, and I forgot what the exact Bible verse is, but something like God put the knowledge of himself in your heart and in everybody's heart.
oh, okay. But I mean, I would imagine, are you getting a lot of people who are like reaching out to debate about the Bible?
Yeah, this seems to be less a
this might be a more general question about how to use SE with somebody, but I can address it. Let me just talk, because it actually kind of relates to what you can do with RfR. You may be presented with a scenario that you know nothing about. You may be chatting with a Muslim or a Christian, and maybe you were an atheist your whole life. It doesn't mean that you can't ask great questions. In fact, I think the less you know about the topic, the better questions you might ask, because you may ask a seemingly basic question that might completely cause a person to take another look at all their views. Like a Trinity, I'm not quite exactly sure what you mean by the Trinity. What exactly do you mean by that? And the act of them explaining it might be like, and I've even had this happen where somebody says, it sounds really weird when I say it to you, and just forget about it. It's kind of crazy now that I say it out loud. So don't worry about having to bone up on a specific book if you feel like you're going to be running into a bunch of Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or Muslims or anything like that. You don't need to be an expert. They are the supposed expert. They hold the belief, they have the confidence in it, or they're reaching out to RfR because they have this issue. They know about it. They are the ones that are going through it. They're suffering through it. They are the experts. And think of yourself as a mirror to them. How can I clarity, I want to be a nice, shiny, clear, crystal clear mirror where they can very clearly see what it is that's causing them these problems. And
you're
you don't
almost
need
suggesting like be in a way that they are interviewing themselves.
They are interviewing themselves, essentially. Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Somebody raised their hand. I don't know what that means, though. I'm not an expert in this just yet. Somebody raised their hand.
Sorry,
I clicked on it. Allison?
That was me.
Ison. Okay.
Hey, I have a question. It doesn't. I've got two, in fact, but one of them relates directly to what you said today. It's not on the topic that you've just covered, though. Were you finished going through that?
No problem.
Don't want to step on you.
No. Go ahead.
It relates to watching for detours, which I'm hyper conscious of. But I had a chat with a young lady. Well, I assume it was a young lady based on what she was talking about last night. And that's another assumption I've got to stop making. Who started throwing a whole bunch of stuff out. Like we started with fear of hell, and we went down that road a little bit, and I offered her some resources and stuff to look at, because it sounded like she was just at the start of asking questions. And then there's a whole bunch of detours sort of got thrown out there, like the unfairness of hell heaven system, and how Christians are nasty, and how one religion's a lazy religion, and pro-choice sort of came up there, but I got to the point where she started giving me these. They started giving me these interesting topics. One was, I feel like I'm being held back from being myself, and I don't want to be judged. And they sort of came up at the same time. So I tried to split those and say, look, let's deal with these one at a time, and we'll circle back to the other one. And by the time it was 90 minutes, by the time we got to, we got finished with the first one, and I deliberately avoided going back to the next one. I said, look, it might be a good time to pause. Because I've seen you do this in your videos, and I just don't know whether that was because I almost made a promise that we'd deal with this other thing, and I didn't do it. And I just wonder whether that's the better technique, is to split it and say, look, we're always here, come back, but go away and do your homework, because I gave us some homework on the hell thing, and
right.
Come back when you're in a better position to deal with that one question. Would that be a better way of dealing with it, or should I, should we, if we make a promise in those sort of chats, should we hold on to that and carry on?
Wow. So I have a lot of thoughts about that. And I think that's a great scenario that you're bringing up. And I've been an RfR agent where, and this was back in when we would sign up for blocks of time, and it was closing in on the time for me to leave. And I'm thinking, oh, we kind of have to wrap this up. So I think I can relate a little bit to that. One thing that I do that I think could be useful that everyone here at RfR can start right away I sort of refer to this as sort of like a shotgun approach. When you get somebody who's excited that they finally have someone to talk to, whether they meet you on the street or they're calling you up, they just dump. They hit you with everything. It kind of reminds me when somebody says, I've got so many reasons for thinking that God is real. I just don't know where to start. And one thing that you can do is ask them, well, of the 5 or 10 things that you mentioned, which one do you think is troubling you the most? Do you want to work on that one? Or is that one off limits? Do you want to go for something a little bit safer? But we have to focus on one thing. I'm worried that I might not be able to help you if you give me too many things to talk about, to explore with you, because you're not talking. If you give me too many things to explore with you, I'm afraid we might get lost. So what would you say is the main thing that's troubling you tonight? Isolate that. And then as you notice detours, you might want to just kindly remind them of the one thing that they told you. And then I'm not exactly sure how long you have to stick with somebody. Like, can you tap out and have somebody come in? I'm not exactly sure how that works. Maybe Todd wants to win, but there was one more thing I wanted to add there, that it could be really easy to overwhelm somebody with questions. And if somebody's already overwhelming you with like all these different areas and potential topics, it can really become a mess very quickly. So try to isolate it down to one major thing, get all the way through it before moving on to the next one. Todd, did you want to address the time limit thing?
Yeah, no one is obligated to stay on for long periods of time like that, and always feel free to say, listen, we talked about your main topic, we've given you some resources, let's put a pause on it and come back and give them the chance to walk away and think about it. So yes, we want to encourage that.
Okay, thank you.
I do
have another question.
Yeah, sorry. Please go ahead.
Another question for you, Anthony, but I'll wait till the end if we've got time at the end. It relates to one of your online discussions.
Okay, I'm noticing
YouTube
here.
videos.
Yeah, let me move on to the next. I noticed Kimberly had one here. What do you do when you ask them a question, let's say about where they believe the Bible came from? I don't know if you'd ever actually ask them during an RfR interaction, but they give you some wild thing like, well, it was this. The 4 authors saw God personally, and they all wrote it at the same time. Now, if you have a cursory understanding of how the Bible was put together, that's not how it happened. I might ask something like, if we discovered that that's not how the Bible was put together, would that affect your confidence in the claim in any way? And I say, well, yeah, absolutely. That would devastate my whole argument. I think I would probably just have to stop believing the Bible if it didn't. That's the best way that this message could have been conveyed by God. If God came down and talked to all 4 authors, and discovering that didn't happen, then maybe I'd pursue it with them. Okay, let's explore how the Bible was really put together. But more often than not, it's not the reason why they adhere to the belief. It's kind of like the same question. Listen, we have a limited amount of time. What's the one big thing that's troubling you? Let's go after that. We spend a lot of time chasing reasons for people's confidence in their views that aren't the reasons why. And we can spend a lot of time discussing things that are troubling people that aren't the thing that's troubling them. So spend a little bit of time up front isolating it and figuring out what's really at issue here. There was another one above it, but let's see here. Joe's question reminds me of a great example of a Jehovah's Witness talking to people who know nothing about the Bible. Oh, okay, that was just sort of a reference. Oh, what was your other question, Asen? Or Ison?
It's Asen. Sorry, I just had to unmute my mic. Look, it goes into that series of videos you did with the young lady on, I don't know what campus it is, but a young lady called Vanessa, who is obviously very deep into her belief about the importance of
narratives,
the Native American thought, and offering that as an alternative version of truth. And it was the best example I think I've seen of someone who had effectively arranged their thinking to be almost like they were deep in their own religious belief, and it's the only lens that they can see the world through. And I'm just wondering whether I was fascinated by that. That I joined that series in the second chat. I had to stop watching it because I couldn't listen to it. I just hit a wall. But after joining this team, I thought, look, I've got to go back and unpick that. And I did. I was really glad I did. I went back and watched the first video, and then watched them all in sequence and watched how you progressed through with her. And it was a fascinating process. But I mean, do you think you had any impact on her at all? She was those glasses she's looking at the world through are so thick that I don't think she can see anything else.
Well, I mean, it's hard to guess what a person thought about the conversation after. My sense is that she seemed like an extremely intelligent person who was noticing problems. She seemed like she was noticing some of the problems with what she was saying, but whether or not it ever advanced beyond that, I don't know. I went back to that university for 3 months after, hoping to get a fourth talk with her, and it just never happened. So I wish I could put a period at the end of that sentence, but I really don't know. It's hard to say. That's one of the frustrating things. And you could probably relate to that as an agent too. Or maybe if you have a support group and somebody comes in and you've had this wonderful engagement, but maybe I can kind of relate to you in that way. You never get the feedback necessarily that you help them. Sometimes you do. I actually do get a lot of people that email me, or they message me, or they even comment on their own video, which can be a little awkward, that they say, that was good. I liked it. I want to do it again, or it helped me, or I don't believe that anymore, or I've got a better reason for thinking that that's the case. That's something that I find extremely valuable, and that I'm putting myself in your shoes. It must be tough to not get that feedback, but my sense is you probably are doing an incredible job helping other people, even though you may not be getting that feedback, because I mean, they're reaching out to complete strangers, and you're listening to them and you're challenging them with your questions, but you're probably doing it in a really respectful way, and you're probably advancing them along. So what you guys are doing is extremely valuable and important. And it makes me feel better doing what I do by challenging people about their views, knowing that there are people to catch them, which is your group. And I've even referred people on the spot to recovering from religion because of that very reason, because you guys are there for them. All right.
Mark has got a question. Mark, you want to pipe up?
Sure. Hi, Anthony. I'm really happy to be here. I've been watching your videos for about a year, so I'm kind of fanboying a little bit, but
no worries.
I wanted to ask, I guess, because obviously you've got experience with chatting with people on RfR on the helpline, and with people doing your street epistemology, and I've seen some of your older videos when you don't have so much patience with people. I know you've obviously put the link at the top of the chat, but what is your best tip with RfR in focus for us to stay as calm, as patient, as focused as possible when we're dealing with someone that might be, pushing back a little bit, maybe not willing to answer the questions that you're giving them? I've had a couple of people who, they come and I ask them sort of questions, Street SE style, and they say, I didn't come here to answer questions, I came to get answers. What's your sort of way to, what's your best tip for basically staying focused and patient in an RfR context?
Very, very good question. Yeah, I did paste a link. Hopefully it's there. Maybe we could paste it again just in case somebody joined and they don't see everything above the point where they joined.
Yeah, I put it back in.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, that blog post really kind of specifically relates to engaging with people where you're using SE with usually a stranger. Although I do have another blog post about using SE with loved ones. But to your point, to your question, as an agent, many of the people that I interview that want to be agents for RfR do seem to have a background where they were religious once. I would guess 5% of the people that I interview that want to be volunteers for RfR were never religious. So I'm mentioning that because you may want to remind yourself of the time when you used to believe, to help you put yourself in their shoes. Like the lingo that they're using, the legacy fear that's coming through, the shame that may be behind the belief. Remind yourself of the person you were when you believed what they believed. Now it might be tough because maybe they're a Baptist and you were a Jehovah's Witness or something, or they're Muslim and you were like a Scientologist or something. So it might be a little bit difficult, but for the most part, I think people who are drawn to RfR are probably empathetic to begin with. So it's probably not too hard for you to put yourself in their shoes, but try to do it. And then also, this is one little tip that I think is in that blog post, but it's something that I try to remind myself of, and it's easy to remind myself of because it's true. I try I tell myself that I need to be on my best behavior because other people might be watching. They may be mimicking me. And because I'm recording and uploading a lot of my talks to YouTube, that's literally what's happening. So it helps me stay calm and focused because I think, well, shoot, I don't want to give a bad example of what an atheist is. And that helped me stay calm. So I almost tricked myself into being more empathetic and more respectful and calm because I was dreading the backlash if I didn't. Does that make sense? So, but when you do it enough, you start to realize that I don't need to be upset with them. I don't need to be triggered by them saying, you can't be a decent person unless you think Jesus is real. And there's no way that you can raise kids and be good. That would be something that would really upset me in the past, but now it doesn't. I find it interesting and I want to understand, well, what is really driving that view? Why do they think that? Because it's clearly not true because I don't believe in any gods and I've got the best family in the freaking world. So it helps you, I guess, distance yourself from kind of taking your ego out of it. It's not about you, it's about them. And if you turn yourself into a mirror and take yourself out of it as much as you possibly can, you're going to find it probably your engagements will be a lot better. And this is one of the very few variables that you, Mark, and other people have control over. You just have to fight it. It takes practice to not get upset by some of the things people say. But if you remind yourself that, hey, this conversation will probably be better, it will be more effective, and it will stay with them far longer, and it might actually help them if I don't get upset. That could really help you. Now, there have been some times where my patients have been tried, and I was like, the best thing for me to do is to end this talk. And I do have a video example of it. It's an old one. I think it's called Rocket Ship to Mars. Anyone ever watched that one? Like, it just almost goes completely off the rails, and he wants to talk about legalizing marijuana and all this stuff. And he wasn't even listening. So I just I put the cap on my pen and I'm like, okay, I think that's about it then. But I ran into him a few months afterwards. He remembered me and he raced out to his car to go get some information to show me. He had been thinking about it. He researched his view further and he was still eager to talk to me, I think largely because of the way that I handled myself. So if he was at a 10 and I'm here at a 2, it might be tempting to meet him at that 10, but realizing that me just getting ratcheted up he's going to ratchet it up. And if I just stay calm and collected, he's going to probably come down and meet me there. And that's what he ended up doing. So it's just a question of, I think this sounds braggadocious, but this is something that we're all capable of. It's this emotional maturity. We're all capable of being emotionally mature enough to not let our egos get in the way of these engagements. And we're here to help people. So if you can just acknowledge that's something that you can control, I think you'll really succeed with your engagements at RfR, particularly if you start using some SE here and there.
Anthony, if you've got a little more time, John has the last question, one final question, if you don't mind. John, you want to?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Pipe up. If you're talking, I can't hear you, John. Nope. You can see your mouth moving, but can't see you talking.
Audio now unmuted alert.
That better?
Yes, that's better. There we go.
Okay. I had the wrong microphone selected. I'm honored to have the last question. Anthony, I'm a big fan of yours as well, and I watch you in cordial curiosity. I'm an apprentice to SE. My question is actually more about SE in person. I want to start getting out and doing it a little bit more when with my friends when we can all actually get back together again. And after watching a lot of your videos and other videos, my question is, how do you control your facial expressions? Because I've seen so many times where people have said something and my face would have gone, did you just hear what came out of your mouth? And because I tend to be animated in the face anyway, and I don't know how you do it.
This isn't the first time I've received this question. So there must be a segment of the population that really struggles to control their facial expressions, and it's gotten them in trouble in the past. But at least you're aware of it. At least you're aware that this is a problem for you, and it has the potential to impact your conversations. So I don't know what exactly you do for RfR, but if you're chatting with somebody, you're not going to have that issue, right? You can roll your eyes, but then you can actually think about it before you type your response. But how do you stop the eye roll? What a great question. How do you do that? It kind of goes back to the last piece of advice that I was giving, that when you recognize how disastrous a very vitriolic response can be to the conversation, I kind of remind myself that if I roll my eyes or stifle a laugh and it comes through, it's going to probably jeopardize the conversation. I guess that's probably at the back of my mind. Maybe it's not even at the back of my mind. Like it's in the forefront of my mind that the way that I'm behaving is going to have an influence on this conversation. So I don't know if I have a specific piece of advice. Does anyone have some advice for I'm sorry, what was your name? Mohammed? Are you Mohammed?
John.
Oh, John. Yeah. Does anyone have advice? I'm not exactly sure. I mean, other than trying to get out of the habit of doing it. I mean, you could probably maybe obscure it, maybe with your hand or something.
I think
I've been doing this for a few years now, possibly longer than you, Anthony, in terms of wearing the mask in public. And sometimes it's easier if you just pretend everything that person said is stupid, or everything that they say is clever. You know what I mean? You just have a completely neutral response to absolutely everything that they say.
Yeah, well, there's some verbal things that you can say. You probably notice it in the videos where I say like, like the conversation that I had with the young woman who leaves out water for ghosts, like spirits. You know, they get thirsty, they don't go away right away, so we leave this water out for them. And I think I said something like, you leave out water because they're thirsty. That's interesting. So you can sort of take the energy that you may have formed into a eye roll, or maybe some sort of like an exasperated sigh, and just turn it into some sort of neutral wording, like, that's really interesting. I never thought of it, and I never really thought of it that way before. Maybe
that's
try
actually
to.
one of your tells.
That's one of my tells.
That's interesting.
How many of us have left cookies out for a Santa?
You know, that's funny, because I have a very close friend, and whenever I say something that I think that they don't agree with me on, they say, "Oh, that's interesting," and I'm like, "They disagree with me." Yeah, but mix it up. Don't try not to be too. And these are probably people these are strangers or whatever, but
I think
that's tough. I do have another piece of advice too, if you don't mind. If you find yourself really struggling with containing your emotions or your facial expressions or your sighs of exasperations, ask yourself, what topics am I engaging with where I struggle on those the most? And it may always be religion. I'm fine. I can talk about politics. I can talk about abortion or COVID or whatever. And I don't have this issue, but when it comes to religion, I do. You might want to do a little soul searching, for lack of a better word, of why is it there? Why is this particular issue troublesome for me? And if you recognize that there is a particular topic that you struggle with the most, and this kind of goes back to keeping your cool too, just talk about other topics. Practice your poker face, practice staying calm on topics that you're comfortable with, and then slowly ratchet it up for yourself and start testing yourself and pushing yourself more and more.
Or even coming out of a place of honest curiosity, like, why do you say that? If you start out the conversation totally from a place of curiosity, then that has helped me at least not do the facial expressions.
It just dawned on me too that one way that I can also vent some of that extra energy by hearing something that's just maybe completely ludicrous, but they're excuse me, it's completely ludicrous and silly, but they're so invested in it and they really think that it's true. Like I might really struggle to be neutral and not do an eye roll, but then after the conversation, I can vent to maybe people that might be listening because I'm live streaming, or I might talk with my family about it later. Like I had this really interesting conversation and it kind of went sideways and I was really struggling to maintain my composure. And I really thought about saying this, but I'm glad that I didn't. Just talking about what you would have done, having a place to vent. That's why what you guys do is so great, because you have a community where you're engaging with these strangers, but then you can also decompress with your peers. Daryl and Gail, they've set up something really special here. And you have a lot of resources available to you that a lot of people don't have. And that's one of them.
Could I just jump in quickly?
Yeah. Fine with me.
One thing that I've used in the past when I was really, really bad at poker was to do the, I'm thinking about that, because it hides the smile. And it hides the frown if you're frowning. And if you're sort of nodding your head, they can't see that your eyes are rolling. Mm-hmm. So it's this kind of, interesting thing you said there. But really what you're doing is you're hiding the, oh, what an idiot you are.
Yeah, you can, I sometimes will wear a cap and I can tip my head down, and I suppose I could use it to, I don't do that though, because I feel like I have control of my faculties and I can listen to somebody say something that would be completely insulting to a typical non-believer. But when you do this enough, you start seeing the bigger picture and you realize the problems of having that type of reaction. So you just stop doing that reaction. So you're kind of training yourself in a way to do that. But yeah, that's a good tip. And also this is probably for more people who are having verbal encounters. You don't have to say, like if they say something off the wall, sometimes we say yes, and they can take that to mean that you agree with them. So something like, or, oh, wow, that's interesting. I never quite thought of it that way before. That's another way of you're still speaking and you're getting that energy out, but you're not agreeing with them and you're not dismissing them either. You're staying neutral. Try to stay neutral. The more neutral you are, the better you are at staying neutral, the better you will be with your engagements here at the hotline, I think, and the support groups, and probably all the interactions that you have going forward in your life. I honestly do think that's the case. It certainly helped me.
I have kind of a generic question. I think I reacted most to the I'm afraid of hell. Is it part of street epistemology to ask where those ideas came from? Somebody told that person about hell. Somebody told that person what would happen to them if they left religion. Is knowing where that came from, is that a possible way to go? And then question whether that source of information has been reliable for them?
That's a great suggestion. And yes, I think it could be really useful. Having a person reveal the origin story of a particular belief or a phobia or a fear can be extremely helpful. And you could even use it to build rapport. So even during the rapport building phase, as the person's explaining the origin of it, they're revealing details about themselves. Well, this happened. I was born in 1970, and it wasn't until I was in the 5th grade that I had this event with this nun, and she was telling me about about hell, and it stuck with me. So yeah, identifying the origination of these beliefs can be really useful. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely do that. You may even notice us doing that sometimes in some of the SE videos. How did you acquire this fear of ghosts? Why are you standing here today thinking that ghosts are actually real? Well, my dad is really, he's all into that stuff. My mom, she's very skeptical, but my dad was always into this. And I really align more with my dad than my mom. And so maybe that has to do with it. So they're even starting to think about it themselves. Yeah, great question.
What about dealing with, let's see, family, and you get some anger? I usually get a little bit pissed off because they're always probing and poking at me, especially my dad. He's a pastor, so it's very hard.
It sounds like you're talking about yourself personally, but I mean, I can see how you might even get calls from people who are talking about this. Yeah. I guess it kind of depends on the age of them too. Do you have a lot of young people reaching out or adults? I'm not exactly sure, but you might, I don't know if I have a really good answer for you there, Ariel, on how you might be able to deal with that. Other than maybe just a broader discussion about you're going to be around people that you love who you disagree with. What do you think might be some of the ways to mitigate it and to minimize the weight that you're giving to it? Why are you giving so much weight to what a person says to you about what they think of you? Do you give them the same weight back? I might try approaching it that way.
I have a quick question.
Please.
With the, I'm young, I live at home, I'm afraid to come out to my parents. My first reaction is always to go, are you safe? Do you have somebody in your life you feel safe talking to? But from an RfR perspective, I don't know if that's like planting a seed that maybe they actually do feel unsafe and they didn't actually articulate that before. So how do we handle that from like a chat line perspective?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a real good concern to have, because you don't want to make the situation worse for the people who are reaching out to you. I don't think there's any way that you can actually have a conversation with somebody where you're not potentially influencing them one way or the other. Even when you are gingerly asking these questions, you could still very well ask a question that causes some hardship for a person. That's just the nature of human engagement. So, I mean, I suppose there's probably some things that you can do to minimize it by saying like, I really hope that this isn't the case, or I really hope that this doesn't make things more confusing, but I am wondering ... And you can say your thing there. But it's sort of the assumption of risk that I think a person takes when they reach out to a helpline, that they may get really good advice, that good or bad advice, that could influence them either positively or negatively. Yeah, I mean, there's not much you can do, but I guess helping them assess the situation to see if it's really appropriate for them to come out would be a really critical thing to explore with them.
Asking their background story. Get them to tell the backstory of why, and a lot of times that will reveal more of their personal situation without you having to risk triggering something maybe, or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? No one's typing any questions.
Well, thinking about that question and maybe others, one of the issues behind anybody who's calling in wanting to leave religion is then having to assume responsibility for their actions after that. They can't lay it on God or Jesus or their religious beliefs or whatever. And I don't think we ever want to tell people what to do. We want to encourage them to assess their own situation and make decisions that are in their best interest, regardless of what we might think. So in terms of a younger person leaving home, the issue of safety and options that they have become critically important to explore, it would seem to me.
Yeah. And the act of engaging with you about what their options are could help reveal more options to them. And I think there's a real concern about revealing too much about your own self when you're engaging with people. Like, you may have been in this exact situation and you figured out a way to get out of your family situation, successfully. And it's got to be kind of tough, I would imagine, to think, I think I might have a winning path here for this person, but I don't want to actually offer it to them. But you can use questions to nibble around the edges, to say something like, let's say maybe there was a close family member who took you in that was more sympathetic to, and that might be the case here. You might ask a question to say something like, are there other family members who might be willing to take you in while you were, if you decided to go through this journey. So you can ask open questions like that just to get them talking. Yeah. Fear of hell is something that I've actually wanted to use street epistemology on. There was a woman that came up to me once when I was at the university who was familiar with SE videos. And she said, I'm an atheist now. I stumbled across SE videos and videos from other atheist content creators. And, but I still have this lingering fear of hell. And I remember this being a real problem from working with RfR. And I've encouraged her to come back so I can SE her fear of hell. Now, I probably have a lot more leeway doing that than maybe you folks with RfR. But, and she came back a few times, but she said she didn't really fear it anymore. So I wasn't able to use SE on it. But that was that's something that I really love to capture on video, is doing some SE on those fears. Okay, I see a question that popped up. What are possible action items? We have a lot of resources we can give them to read, watch, but any other suggestions? Yeah. I think the mistake here is to put the suggestions of the action item on yourself. You can ask them what they think might be a really good task for them to do to help them remember the conversation and maybe advance from where they are now when they reached out to you. SE is really kind of easy once you grasp it, because you're not really doing any of the lifting. You're asking the person questions to have them do all the lifting. So even in this situation, I might just come out and ask them, if we had to come up with a task that might advance you from where you are today, what do you think that might be? Do you have any suggestions? And they may say like, well, what do you mean? And you might say, well, the previous caller, I don't know how much you can disclose. Or you can say, well, it's not uncommon for us to get somebody who reaches out and says they have a fear of hell. And oftentimes the caller might say, journaling for about 20 minutes really might be an action item that they think could help them. So you could actually be suggesting something without doing it, but they may say, oh, I hate to write, but I'm really good at painting. Maybe I can paint something. Yeah, maybe painting would actually do it. So you can try it that way, but don't just throw, just like I wouldn't recommend you throwing out reasons why somebody shouldn't believe something. Don't do that. Ask the person what reasons they would need to leave. And it sort of applies here. Ask the person what resources or tasks they think that they could complete or read, and that would help them. That's the way that I would go with that.
Well, that also might be a point where directing them to resources, because we do have, with that particular question anyway, we do have resources about 5 reasons to tell your parents and 5 reasons not to. And even if it's just reading what options and reasons why, yay or nay, could be very helpful. But I do believe it's really important when we can to try to help somebody to find some step that some action that they can take that will move them further ahead in their own journey to wherever they're going to end up. So, reading what other people have done, looking at podcasts of people who have left, and the positives and negatives might be just, getting more information.
Yeah. And somebody here added, as people leave religion, the internal fears will come up and need to be dealt with. I would tell them it's a normal process and not to fear finding answers. Yeah, I think this, realizing that you're not alone, you have to be careful about how you reveal this, I suppose, but acknowledging that what they're telling you is not all that uncommon. You don't want to diminish it because it's very important to them. They're very worried about it. They're very concerned about it usually. So you don't want to dismiss it, but hearing that other people have been going through it and are going through it and getting through it is extremely important, because people want to know that there's a light at the end of that tunnel, even though this might be a fear that you live with your entire life, like the fear of hell. acknowledging that there are people that still have these fears, but they've found ways to minimize it can be really helpful for people who don't even think that that's an option for them. Four minutes left. Anything else? I always wondered also if there's a difference between how you might use these tools when you're in a support group and there's 20 other people sitting around in a circle listening, and these one-on-one conversation that you're probably having. I would imagine that it's probably a lot easier in the one-on-one, even on text-based one-on-ones. It's probably a lot easier to use focused questions as opposed to having a dialogue with a person where there's other people watching. One of the recommendations I had to Eric was, if you are a facilitator of a support group, you might want to let the people who are also in the support group aware that you're using some tools that seem to be more effective when there's, I guess you want them interactive. But if you're really engaging with somebody, it could be really helpful if other people sat off on the sideline and listened rather than jumping in and throwing you off with your questions. But I guess that's something you as a facilitator just need to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Let's see here. As people leave religion, oh, did somebody add to this? How do you stay so level-headed when you're interviewing people? Well, I don't always do it. One of the most recent videos I uploaded, I was I was fine with the person I was speaking to, but there was some background noise, and I like snapped to get their attention, and that it blew up to be a whole big thing. Don't do that. So sometimes I get irate, but it's usually not the person that I'm speaking with. It's other stuff that bugs me. So like a rattling window, or the wind noise that's going under the window here that you probably can't hear is bothering me a little bit. So I have to try to manage. I'm not usually managing my anger with the person that I'm speaking with. I'm done. I've reached the point where that doesn't bother me all that much. It's usually other stuff that I can't control. The cool thing though about staying calm when you're interviewing people is it's one of the few things that you have control over, is how you respond to what they're telling you and the reaction that you're having. So just acknowledging that this is something that I have control over. I don't have to be upset when I hear a theist say, you can't be moral and raise kids. There's no way atheists are good parents. This is a very upsetting thing for an atheist to hear, but it really doesn't upset me that much these days, because I try to think that I could very well be in their shoes if I had the same kind of beliefs that they did. So they're just acting out on the beliefs that they have. So that's helpful. I did paste a link up above. I might have to repaste it. Can you guys scroll up and see that? I'm thinking maybe if you joined late, you might not be able to see it. So I'm going to just copy and paste it again. I have some tips in here on how to stay calm and focused when you're having conversations. A big suggestion there is, and you probably even do this at RfR, pretend that somebody is watching your interaction. Now for me, I'm recording my interactions. People are watching them. They're maybe even listening in live. If I post them to YouTube, there will definitely be people giving me feedback on how my behavior. People are not shy about that, even with RfR. So even if you're having a private one-on-one conversation, you can pretend that there's a group of 1,000 people watching your interaction. Just putting yourself in that mindset might actually be what it takes to help you stay more calm and focused when you're talking to those people. Great questions. Is there anything else? Someone is usually watching. Yeah, I would think if you're doing something with RfR, if it's a support group, somebody's watching. If it's the chat, somebody's watching. If it's the phone, I don't know how the phone works. Can anyone just, are those recorded? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you guys are being monitored. So just think about that. You're stepping up your game more than likely because you know that your peers and your bosses are observing you. And that I think is a good way to trick yourself into becoming calm. But you're sort of deceiving yourself, I guess. You're not deceiving yourself because it's factually true you're being watched. Another thing that's really helped with me is to pay attention when you don't. Pay attention to your interactions when you do lose your cool, as painful as it might be to go back and replay them through your mind, or if you have the ability to watch them again, like I can often do with some of my videos. Seeing the conversation get completely derailed because of the way that you behaved is a really great way to teach yourself to not do that anymore. It really is. Because you can be, oh man, why did I let that silly comment that they made trigger me so much to the point where I lashed out at them? Now look what happened. Did you see how defensive they became? Did you see how the whole tone of the conversation changed afterwards? And that could really wake you up. Yeah. Let's see some of the types. It's also helpful to understand that the person is acting from their own life experiences and perceptions. You can't take it personally. Yeah. Even if they're attacking you personally, even today now, if somebody were to attack me personally, I would say, like, I think I'd be verbalizing my feelings. Like, I'm finding that I'm really feeling hurt by you thinking that I haven't grown in the last 5 years since the last conversation that we had where I lashed out at you. I've really grown a lot since then. And it saddens me to think that you're unaware of the journey that I've taken in these last 5 years. Can I talk you through it? And so, yeah, sometimes just verbalizing what you're feelings, I think, can really help reset the conversation. And it humanizes you too, to the person that you're speaking with.
And can I say something quickly? It's usually people are polite. They're not, in RfR, they're not aggressive. They're not offending anybody. So if they ask a question, even if it sounds a bit offensive, like how would you raise kids if you're not religious? It's to everybody, not to you personally. So I find it easier to keep calm to somebody who is polite and respectful. So that's a big factor there as well for me.
That's a really good point. They may be completely unaware that they said something that was extremely offensive to you. And they could be baffled by your reaction too. But it goes both ways too. Like, I've asked theists, well, what God specifically are we talking about here? And I meant that very sincerely, but then the reaction could be like, well, what do you mean? It's Jesus, of course. How dare you? Jesus is the only God. And you really had an innocuous, tone to your question, but it just got completely misinterpreted. But yeah, we have to be charitable. That's such a huge part of these interactions, is being charitable with the people that you're speaking with. Now, they may be trolling you. They may be, the other word I was looking for. I can't remember the term, but they may be needling you intentionally because they don't like you or what you believe. But there are people like that. But even still, I wouldn't let it get me upset, because if you descend to the level that they're at, it's going to keep going on that trajectory probably. There are many times I'll have interactions with people on Twitter or something, and they come back they say really mean things, but I ignore the mean things and I focus on what they've said and I'll say, well, do you mind if we explore the claim that you just made there or something? It kind of throws them for a loop. Like, oh, they didn't jump on the attack that I gave them. Why not? And they may even repeat it a couple times. But what I found is that if you maintain the high road and you ignore the insults and you stay focused and ask good questions, they're going to probably settle down and engage with you more respectfully. Yeah.
Surprisingly, we have such a low number of trolls. We had a big surge when Gail was running for Tennessee Senate. But it's really, our numbers are low. People that reach out to us are usually at their wit's end. And they've been looking for answers in so many different places inside their own community. And so most of them are here with sincere questions. And so I don't think we experience, that where they're needling us on purpose. But once in a while it does happen, and it's good to be aware of that for sure.
Yeah. You also have the advantage, I suppose, of, most of your interactions are being observed by your colleagues. So you're not only engaging with a person, you're being observed, and you're also teaching people. So you may ask a really good question that the other agents are observing and thinking, damn, I never even thought of that question. That's a good one. I'm going to write that one down. So your situation is really kind of cool because you could just be passively reading these conversations after the fact and improving your own skills. And we don't really get that with SE. We are having these conversations and then maybe we're watching them later and we're hopefully improving on it. But you're getting some really good feedback, usually, I would imagine. I hope so. I hope you're getting feedback from your colleagues.
We have such a great team. Usually a lot of times you're on a chat and people in the background are supporting you, giving you resources, maybe giving suggestions, especially if you have a hard chat. And so, yeah, the teamwork here is unbelievable.
Yeah. This last comment here, somebody was saying, if you respond in a way that shows you genuinely are curious about their beliefs, it could be very disarming of their anger. Yeah. Yeah. People generally like talking about what they believe. And if you come at this from a place of curiosity and wonder, and you're honest about it, then you're going to probably have really good talks. I had this talk with this guy. There's a video on my channel. It's not even really street epistemology because we don't even get off the ground, but it's called Rocket Ship to Mars. And it's this this guy that comes up to me on the trail and he's angry that I'm out there with the camera and what are you doing out here? And he's like a very rules-based guy. And I just stayed really, he was at a 10 and I was at a 2. And there were some times where maybe I went for a 3 to a 4, but I really tried to stay down here at a 10. And he started coming down and meeting me. And we started talking about like legalizing marijuana or something. And months later, I ran into him again and he was excited to see me and he ran out to his car and he printed out all this information to give me about legalizing marijuana or why we shouldn't legalize it. But he remembered that conversation and he remembered me and he was eager to engage with me again. And I don't think that would have happened if I had met his anger with anger. Check out that video when you get a chance. It's a real hoot. All right. Honesty, vulnerability, empathy all help with connecting with people. Yeah. I love that we encourage empathy so strongly. Empathy is key. Empathy is key. And being sincere about it too, not just pretending. Like really, really wanting to understand why somebody thinks that that's true. Understanding that it might be difficult to realize that I don't have a good reason for thinking that it's true. Being there for them or directing them to somebody like RfR. One of the reasons why I like RfR so much is because it's what I think is needed for people who are on the flip side of the conversations that I have with them. When I engage with people and I use SE to really challenge their views, it can really cause them to start doubting and needing resources and community. And that's why I support RfR as much as I do, because we need groups like yours to be there for the people who are on the opposite side of those conversations. Yeah. Honesty, vulnerability, empathy. That's all key.
Anthony, thank you so much. We're past our time and I want to respect your time for here and not go too much longer. I do want to say if you are really sincere in having a conversation on the fear of hell, you can always take a chat or phone call. So I'll put that invitation out there for you. And because we get those quite often. Everyone, this has been wonderful. We've learned so many good things here today. Again, I want to thank everyone for what you all do with RfR, whether you're a helpline agent or if you're with a support group. We so much appreciate you and what you're doing and making a difference in people's lives. Just a quick reminder, on Monday night, Eric and I were interviewing Dr. Hector Garcia and Dr. Daryl Ray, and we hope that y'all can join us on Monday night for that. So everyone have a great weekend, stay safe, and a great, well, keep doing what you're doing. All right.